The ways in which families choose to support their children vary widely. Some focus on establishing strong, healthy values with minimal financial assistance once the children are adults, and others may fully fund college and continue providing financial support well into their adult children's lives. Naturally, many different approaches exist between these two extremes. Today, we'll discuss our thoughts regarding supporting our kids financially, including how much, how long, and why. I'm Josh, and with me, as always, is my co host, Elliot. Hey, Elliot, how's it going?
Pretty good, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, we're just a week and a half or so away from Christmas.
Hard to
Uh,
believe. I mean, this year, at least for me, has flown by. I don't know how it feels for you on the other side of the work horizon. If you think the year has gone by slower or faster than you would have thought.
I feel like it's been a pretty steady pace and maybe actually a little bit slower. I don't know. It's hard to have to think on that a little bit, but as I sit here, I feel like things have slowed down for me, and I think that's just hopefully a natural result of not being in the day-to-day grind.
Yes, I have certainly felt the day-to-day grind more recently, and it seems frenetic at this point. So I did just work my last day for the year. Hopefully, a little bit of your slowness also hits me, and it slows down for a couple of weeks here.
I wish that for you, for sure. I was actually listening to episode 13 earlier today, Raising a Fire Conscious Family. And I think that's one of our best episodes, and the analytics bear that out. It's one of the top 5 episodes. And just listening back to it, I thought it was a really good conversation between you and I, talking through how we thought about different topics related to our kids and how we spent. And I thought one of the things that where we kind of left off, we touched on briefly, was like the bigger expense items like cars, and then getting through high school and then college and beyond. We didn't really even talk about the beyond too much, but as I mentioned in our intro here, that I know that I've seen a lot of variations of how families plan for how they're going to navigate through raising kids. And it can be everything from, like I mentioned, covering all of college and then some sort of, I forget what the term is. It's like continuing economic support or something like that. It's a fancy way of basically saying you're still being supported by your parents, sometimes well into someone's 30s. I mean, we hear stories about that all the time where someone is covering a portion of rent. I know that you and I probably don't fall into that category, but we do have different views of how we have navigated through or plan to navigate for some of those big expense items. And then I'm sure we'll probably fall on the same page when it comes to how we hope for the independence of our children once they get to that adulthood, whatever age that might be, somewhere between like 18 and 22.
I would say before we really get roaring here, I would always like to do our call to action here. So if you do enjoy the show, please do us a favor, give us a thumbs up on YouTube or a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or your podcast player of your choice. Share us with your friends. Word of mouth is always our best way of reaching new viewers, and we always love hearing your feedback. Good or bad, we're still always trying to dial in our audio, but I think we're getting better slowly but surely. So please feel free to leave that feedback wherever you feel comfortable, either in person, send us an email, on any of our players of choice, whether it's any of those podcasts or YouTube, etc. We really do appreciate it.
Why don't we start with those high school years, and maybe we can give like just a really brief introduction to maybe how we were raised, because I think that influences the choices that we, in your case, you're many years away from the high school years for your children. I'm past the high school years for my children, but just kind of thought we can go back in time, maybe touch on what we discussed in episodes 2 and 3 of the podcast, our origin stories, reflect just a little bit. So I thought I'll kick things off maybe with car purchases. So in my case, whenever I think I started driving when I was about 17, my parents bought me a $800 truck. I remember that it cost, I don't know why I remember, but it's a significant pivotal moment in a young person's life. And they bought a used pickup truck that would cost $800 back then. This would have been the mid, early to mid 90s. They had actually said something like, "Hey, we're going to buy this, but we're also going to use it." I remember my mom saying, "We're going to use it to haul mulch. And if we need to go pick something up, we're going to use it for that reason." Thankfully it never became a borrow situation. It was just my truck, but that was my first car, and that lasted me throughout high school until I was ready to purchase my next vehicle. And so I kind of carried the same tradition with my kids. All four of them, we either purchased or provided a car as sort of a hand me down to them from something that we had been driving. So we kind of went with that. My thoughts were start with an older, a inexpensive car that is fairly reliable, and because it's kind of a toss up. And then they can be on their way to getting a part-time job, and we're not out a lot of money, and it's an older car, so if it gets banged up, if they get in a fender bender or whatever, it's not a big deal. So that's kind of how we handled the car situation. Most of them, out of the four of them, I think they were able to keep that initial first car throughout their high school years. How about for you, Elliot?
Yeah, I would agree is that my situation growing up as far as cars was concerned, it was very similar. I was handed down a car that my parents bought brand new back in 1988. So I drove a 1988 Saab 900S, called it the Tank. I mean, it's a Swedish car, gray, just boxy looking thing. So had had some sweet maroon interior cloth seats. I mean, got me all the best dates in the world, right? Is but no, I mean it was a vehicle that got me from A to B. I was the same way as you. I didn't start driving until I was 17. I had it all the way through going to college, and when I went to college, I didn't have a vehicle my freshman year, and actually the clutch finally gave out when I handed the car back to my parents. So it didn't die in my hands. At least is the way that I remember it in my mind. But yeah, I mean, they bought it brand new in 1988, and I started college in 2005. So it lasted a good 17 years. So as far as what I plan to do with my own kids is, given the fact they're 2 years apart between my oldest and then my twin boys, I hear there's at least a trend in kids these days that they're not quite as eager to go drive, much like you and I probably were back in the day, which still floors me to this day. But yeah, I mean, we'll play it by ear when we get there. But I fully expect to either give them a car that we've been driving for a while or buy a very low cost car, just because the amount of, the statistics around teenagers having, like you said, fender benders, different accidents, things of that nature is much, much higher than the average driver. So yeah, I went to a private school. I saw many kids that got brand new cars when they turned 16. That, it just floors me that that's reality for some people, but I don't expect that to be my children.
Regarding the fact that you mentioned that seems like a lot of young people today wait until they're a little older to drive. That's something that, for whatever reason, all of our kids, with the exception of one, I think my middle son was a little bit reluctant and he waited a little bit longer, but the other three were like ready to go immediately. They were eager at probably 14. They were talking about it. And in Missouri, we can get our permit now on our 15th birthday, whereas whenever I was a kid, it was 15 and a half. But they were all ready to get their permit. They were ready to get their license immediately, and they were driving immediately. And then, so our expectation for them was that they needed to get some form of a part-time job. And kind of our rule was that we'll purchase the car and we'll purchase the first 6 months of insurance, and we'll make sure that it has a full tank of gas whenever we give you gift you that car. The other thing that we were going to cover was we always said we'll cover all maintenance and whatever other issues that you have until you're 18. And if something catastrophic happens, which did happen in the case of my oldest son, where he got into a wreck that totaled his first car, we then helped support getting the next car. But we covered all maintenance for the first couple of years until they were, I guess, out of high school. And then they covered gas and insurance. I always worked with them, and the expectation was that they need to have some kind of understanding of taking care of the car, whether that's cleaning it or doing some of the maintenance issues that we've talked about in past episodes that I won't go into deep with, because some of those are worst performing episodes. But I think that as far as how I was raised, I carried that on and had the very similar plan for them, and it turned out pretty well. There was a few bumps in the road with accidents and some tickets and things like that, but we helped them navigate through those things just as my mom did for me. And yeah, you're like a decade away by the time your kids are driving. Everything's going to be electric. We're going to have flying cars.
Yeah,
And
there'll be flying cars, right? Yeah.
yep.
It's funny that you bring up tickets. Well, and so before I maybe get into that, so I'll talk about at least what the expectation was of me. And I know I've brought this up on previous episodes, so sorry for our longstanding listeners. But yeah, just in general, the mantra that my parents kind of always had for me was, in high school, your job is to be a student. That's how they viewed it. Now, I did have a job in high school. I worked at my high school in our laptop repair center, so that was kind of my first dip into the IT world. That was essentially, I ran IT help desk support at my high school. So I did that to pay for whatever expenses that I had, but quite frankly, my parents paid for my insurance. I had blasts from the past. I had a mobile speed pass, so it was just linked to their credit card, so I was able to, fill up gas at mobile stations. So I was pretty spoiled rotten. I fully admit that. As far as tickets go, though, that squarely landed in my lap if I happened to acquire any of those, and I did. I think my parents were close enough to taking away my license themselves, because so whenever I got a speeding ticket, I paid for a lawyer, moved it to a non-moving violation, so it's not points against my license and my insurance, all of that good stuff. But I think I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 in 1 year when I was 17. I may have not been rolling in the highest speed mobile, but I was certainly pushing it to 11, so to speak.
I think we were very similar. We were reluctant to drive. We waited just a little bit longer, like we both said we were 17. But once we got going, man, there was no holding us
It
back.
got moving. Now, yeah, I will say that it took me a while to get my driver's license. I don't know if, for lack of a better term, how that you drive differently when you go to pass your driver's exam than you actually do on a normal drive. So the first time I took it, I drove like I would normally drive, and I failed by, a couple of points or something like that. And the next time I drove a manual transmission car. Somebody rear-ended me during a test on a hill. So I'm engaging the clutch on a hill, and somebody ran into the back of me. So that was an automatic failure. And then I had one example where it was right after a big storm in St. Louis. It was at the license bureau, and just before I'm leaving this is a giant parking lot to get out onto the main road. Right before I'm like just going down straightaways, hitting stop signs, everything, getting ready to make a left turn to make a right turn onto a main road. Well, in the storm, one of the stop signs had actually blown over, and so it's like this instead of like this. So it's virtually on the ground. I didn't see it. I made my left turn. He said I broke a law
Oh,
and turn around, and yeah. So it took me a couple of times.
yeah. Hmm. I,
But you're right. Once we got cruising, then yes.
one point, not to necessarily contradict your journey, but just maybe to add to the thought of when you're in school, that's your job, so to speak. So we did hold our kids at a pretty high level of expectation, especially older three, I guess. That we knew that they had all done really well in school, getting up to their high school years, and we knew they were more than capable of doing really well in school. We said we really expect A's and B's, don't expect perfection, 4.0 or anything like that, but we expect you to do your best to keep your grades up. My oldest son, he was a three-sport athlete. He was doing a sport all year round, and still we encouraged the part-time job, and he was doing just like Friday and Saturday evenings. I forget exactly what his job was, basically helping out in the kitchen, that kind of stuff. That was enough to give him some spending money, his pay for his gas, and he was able to save a little bit to be able to pay for his insurance. But he was busy. He was busy from the moment that he got up in the morning until essentially late in the evening, because he always had practice, he always had a meet or an event or a game, and then he had part-time work too around the sport. I think it can be done. Me personally, I didn't do any sports and did not participate in any sports in high school, so it gave me an opportunity to work, and I didn't have any problem with that. How about college? I know you're several years away from your college years, but as we sit here today, how do you think about how you're going to support your kids for college?
Depends on a lot of variables is the real answer more than anything. Is I guess my former professional come out and just say the consultant answer of it depends. We could run off to Europe, and depending on Europe, it would be low cost or no cost solutions if they went that direction. If we stayed stateside, then certainly we would seek to help out with college. What I think generally we have thought about or talked about, and of course this isn't set in stone by any means, but we like the idea of giving a gift to each one of our children and using that gift for whatever essentially they see fit. So whether that is paying for their college if they decide to go down that route, or if they want to put that money towards a down payment on a house, they're welcome to do so. If they want to use that to pay for a wedding, if they go that route, they're welcome to do that as well. Is kind of give them the tools to allow them to make those decisions themselves. I know I do like the thought to some degree of them feeling like they have skin in the game as far as going to college. I've heard like Carl from Mr. 1500 say have like his kids take out money, essentially self-fund college and then come in at the end and kind of swoop in and pick up the tab at the very end. I think there's pros and cons to that, but I don't know. There's a lot of variables, and who knows even what the state and value of college really will be we're talking more than a decade from now, when even my oldest is in college.
Yeah, it seems like things are evolving pretty quickly, at least over the last decade or so. Whenever I was in high school, it was you got to go to college. You got to go to college. That's the way to go. I remember all the teachers were really pushing for it. They were talking about taking your ACT, getting the best score on the ACT that you could so that you could potentially get some scholarships. It was just, I felt like everywhere I was as a young person in high school, it was all about going to college. There wasn't really any consideration to any kind of alternative that I can recall. There was a little bit of recruiter presence, military recruiter presence at my high school, but it was very minimal. And I did have a little bit of interaction with them a couple of different times. And at one point considered going into the Marines, but chose not to. My mom chose for me not to, actually. And but I don't think that there was ever much of a consideration to going in a different path, such as like a trade school. Like I think there is more of that now. It seems like that message is getting spread more and more, and I'm a big advocate for that. I think that there is definitely a need for more skilled tradespeople. We hear about that all the time, how there's such a shortage, and I definitely see that. You and I have talked about that. I've had a hard time getting a hold of some different trades to do work on my rental properties. Whenever I was in high school, that was my only thought. I'm going to college, and I didn't really know what that meant. I wasn't the best student in high school, but I just knew that was my next step. And I went to junior college the first couple of years and didn't do great. My mom helped a little bit, but she didn't really have the means to be able to help out too much. So I knew that just going into it, a lot of that was on me. And I took out a little bit of loans, it wasn't very significant at all. And then I took a very long approach to college where I was going part time most of the time. And then eventually, because I got married and had my first child in my early 20s, I still wasn't done with college. And then my employer paid for my tuition, and that's how I finished my bachelor's degree. So I sort of had the same, I guess, opinion that I wanted to continue to share with my kids of you can kind of do it on your own, self-fund, not necessarily from the mindset of college is your only option. I really felt like the landscape of college was changing pretty dramatically, and I started to see like a lot of these people that were making really good livings either online or as the self-educated entrepreneur of some sort. So I really started to encourage those kinds of things. But as a backup plan, we always encourage them to take advantage of what we have in our state, Missouri, which is the A+ program, so that all they had to do was meet a certain grade point average, and they had to have good attendance. And I think there was like one other aspect that they needed to qualify for getting their first 2 years of college paid for. And I think even as my kids were getting older, each of them, you can kind of see as they get into those high school years, you get a feel for which direction they want to take. Our oldest, she was definitely college bound, and she kind of followed in my wife Lori's footsteps. She has bachelor's degree, master's degree in social work. And then the boys that are behind her, they both went to college for a couple of years, but it wasn't their thing. They weren't ready to continue that. So they've gone and gotten full-time jobs. And then our youngest is still trying to figure it out a little bit, but again, he's just not interested in college. Trade school might be in his future. So we're continuously kind of trying to have those conversations about maybe what's next without pushing too hard or without trying to like go in any kind of help them navigate in any specific direction, but just helping them understand that there's a lot of different options available. And then I guess to kind of answer the big question of funding it, I kind of had the same sort of mindset that I guess my mom did for me, was that I'll help you, I'll assist you, but there's a lot of, I still feel like, at least for college, there's a lot of opportunity that you can get that subsidized. Trade school might be a little bit different. And then, of course, I really still believe that there's a lot of opportunity that you can go find a job that is going to help you pay for some of those skills that you could potentially earn through some sort of training that you could take on with you, or maybe some trade school or whatever that might look like.
I think it really just depends on ultimately the fields of study that you want to go into, or what type of career that you want. I think there's a lot of different directions. Like you said, I totally agree with the demand for trades just in general, and I think there's a lot of opportunity right now in that general direction. Like how difficult it is for most people to just find people like contractors to call them back on just a consistent basis. Like it's hard to believe that that is the measure of success. Like is just like, hey, here, take my money. That goes a long way, and that I imagine just shows how busy those people are. Because if they weren't, like, I'm sure they're returning those calls. But at the same point, I'm still somewhat involved with my fraternity. I see posts from active members, looking for jobs and things like that. And so even I saw somebody reaching out that was in my field of study, and I looked over a resume. They were applying, happened to be applying at my place of business, and I was like, yeah, hey, I can do what I can, but honestly, I don't have that much pull even at the level that I'm at. In today's economy, they kind of have the pick of the litter, and I mean, you just kind of got to shine where you're at. And it depends on the type of employer that you're at. Like, it's going to matter, even if I go back to a number of different employers that I've been at, it makes a huge difference if you're working at a small company or a mid-sized company. You have much more influence in that kind of world than, my office, even just in my sole location has over 4,000 people in it. Like I have zero pull. So yeah, it is very interesting. Never has there been a time where I think the possibilities are really endless in the way that you want to try and go make money out there in the world, and how you want to get trained, whether that's independently, you want to be self-taught, you want to go through trades, you want to learn stuff on YouTube, you want to go to a 4-year university. You want to go to a 2-year university. I've got a 4-year university bachelor's followed by a master's degree, and does that make me any more employable than somebody that went through a boot camp in some positions? Probably not. I know that's hard to hear for people probably that have spent a lot of money and time going through some more rigorous programs that, like you said, maybe were pushed when we were going through our high school times. But the economy changes, and the way the skills that are needed to operate in the economy change too. So to that point, I mean, you just got to be dynamic in that aspect.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent the majority of my career in supply chain, and as I entered into that world, so I finished my bachelor's degree when I started with my employer, and I was, I think, maybe a semester or more away from graduating, and I had an interest in the eventual job that I went into, which was a production planner, and I applied for a position. The manager liked everything that I had to say. She liked my experience. There was things from previous roles that fit nicely and gave me some levels of experience that she knew that I would be a good fit for the team. She said, I just can't hire you until you finish your bachelor's degree. It was funny because, and she said, come see me whenever you finish. And I did. That's exactly what I did. I finished, like I said, a semester or so later. She hired me right away. That's where I was for the next, 19 years with promotions and whatnot. But as time went on, they lessened that requirement and started to rely on experience, and saw the value of someone that might be coming from a different company that had a specific knack. Maybe it was in the software, or maybe it was because they could see the different aspects of the supply chain that would be valuable to our team. They were like, okay, well, maybe we look at, do they have an associate's degree? And then they backed off from that, I think, at some point, and didn't even care about what level of education that a person had. It was a little bit more on the experience side. And then it was kind of a combination of the two. Well, if they don't have experience, where do they fall with education, and vice versa? So it's kind of interesting, the evolution that is occurring out there in the workforce now.
The concept of book smart versus street smart. Yeah, I mean, you can have 4.0 students that, I wouldn't hire in a heartbeat, and you can have people that have no formal education that are the most competent individuals that you'll ever run across. So just because, I used to say, hey, I just went here to kind of get my piece of paper and show, hey, look, I can do it. I got my gold star here. But I mean, fundamentally, I think going to college just used to show that at the end of the day, you can show up and do what you were asked, right? That's really what it is, which is how many employers are really just trying to ask that same question is, hey, I'm going to give you a task. Can you actually go get it done and do it generally independently? The more you can do that, the better, the happier your boss is going to be. Yes, it is. I mean, I've managed a team of individuals that all came through boot camps before, pivoting from different careers, and sure, they're not going to have the same skills as probably somebody that came through a 4-year program that was designed for that particular job, but hey, that may not be necessary for them to kind of get their foot in the door, show that they're capable and can do the job, and that's ultimately what employers care about.
Before we get into weddings, which would be maybe the natural progression of where you would continue to offer support to your kids, I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on maybe that area between college and weddings. And for me, I was pretty independent. I guess I was 100% independent. I mean, my timeline between high school, college, getting married was very condensed, even though it took me a long time to get through college. I was married before I finished college. So I was pretty independent from the time that I was about 18 or so and was responsible for all my own stuff. So I kind of hold my kids to that same level of responsibility. The expectation was they were responsible for the majority of their things. If they were still living at home, we didn't charge rent, but they were responsible for everything else. I was raised that way, and then I shared that with my kids. So I'm kind of curious because I'm at that stage now. We haven't gotten through any weddings yet, and you're a long way from that. But from your experience, and then what you would maybe think if you could look into your crystal ball, knowing that it depends, everything depends. But what were you think about that kind of time frame for your kids?
What's the matter? You don't like my consulting fee answer? And that'll be $100, Josh. Come on. I think my general thought on just the time in between, I mean, just call it high school plus, right? I mean, it very much depends on what path that you took. For myself, I went to a 4-year university right after high school. I graduated when I was 22. I got a job back in St. Louis right after I graduated. It happened to be less than 10 minutes from the house that I grew up in, my parents' house. And it was also a role where I traveled probably, I would say 50% of the time. So like Sunday through Thursday for 6 months out of the year or something like that. So I did live at home right after I graduated, just because I think it made the most sense at the time. Even when I was home, I was hardly home per se. I was home for like dinner, do laundry, and then I was out with friends or girlfriend or whatever else at the time. So it was a place to go to sleep and do laundry and rinse and repeat. It did allow me really to supercharge my savings rate. I was fortunate enough because my parents did pay for my college, fully acknowledged that, once again, place of privilege, that my parents were able to give that to me. But very quickly, I was able to amass money because, hey, I'm saving basically all of my income. I'm on a per diem when I'm traveling, so work is paying for the other, 6 months that I'm not at home, and was able to put down a large deposit on my first house when I eventually moved out at 25.
Well, let's get into weddings, the other big one. This one kind of, for me, has always been sort of I'm not really sure how to, I guess, pursue it, or at what level we will fund a wedding. And one of the conversations that we had with our daughter Lexi at one point was, would you rather have a nice big wedding party and, the whole kind of thing that seems to be more trendy now than it was whenever I got married many years ago? Or would you rather have a down payment on a house? I don't know that she gave an answer at the time, but it's kind of one of those things that's a real question that Lori and I are trying to ask ourselves right now. And so we had a case study in our local Choose FI group a couple months back where the couple kind of talked through how they were handling that for their children, and that they were providing like a sum of money. And it was sort of like a one-time gift. Here you go, do with it as you choose. But it was given to them at the point at which they had, I guess, gotten engaged, so that then they had that money. They could plan for the wedding. They could do whatever they wanted to do. So if they wanted to have a big elaborate wedding or whatever that could provide, they could do that. Or if they wanted to maybe choose a different direction, they could set some aside, put part of it towards a wedding, part of it towards something else in life. I guess just for my own piece of it, my own story, my history is that I was always on my own when it came to that. I got married young, and I'll let you on a little secret that might be kind of funny. And this is buried deep into the episode here, so it'd be interesting to see how many people hear this part. But so I've been married twice, but I've actually had three wedding ceremonies. I was 22 when I got married, for 22 or 23, I can't remember now, when I got married the first time. My wife was expecting. So we just had a very short, very small ceremony with just our closest friends and family at a park. Cost nothing except for whatever the officiated it. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And marriage license or whatever. And then we decided that she was from a Catholic family. They needed to do the whole big Catholic wedding. So we decided that on our 1 year anniversary, we would do that. And we did do that. We had a big Catholic wedding, the whole stand, sit, kneel, all that stuff. The receptions were much, much smaller. They were like at a local VFW hall or KFC or any of the local things. They weren't these big venues like you see today that cost $25,000. It was like $2,000. And then you hired a DJ, and then you hired a photographer. It was, in the grand scheme of things, it was cheap back. And this was only 25 years ago. Whenever Lori and I got married, we both had been married. We got somebody to officiate us. We just had our closest friends and family. And we went to the Kirkwood train station, which was beautiful this time of year. And then we just went over to a local pizza place where we rented out the back room and just provided pizza and cake for everyone and had a good time. And again, it was very inexpensive. I like the idea of doing weddings on the cheap and saving that money for something more tangible. And that might mean down payment on a house. It could be any number of things. Maybe it's paying off student debt. Who knows? Whatever makes more sense than just one big party. I don't know. Get your thoughts on that.
I was going to say, now I can tell you the converse tale. No, not to say that ours was super elaborate, but it was much more extravagant than that. I mean, we did do a bigger wedding. So we had religious ceremony and at the church that I grew up in, had the limo, took pictures, and then we had our wedding reception at the Botanical Gardens. So it certainly, now, as you might expect, you have certain caterers that you have to use. I mean, we had photographer, videographer, all the bells and whistles. Looking back at it, I think Dawn and I would both say, yeah, hey, it was a great day. There was a large price tag that came with it. I mean, I think it was probably close to 20 grand all said and done for everything. And that was all ourselves. Now, I will say we got an unexpected gift from my parents, just as a wedding gift. But yeah, never went out planning to receive anything like that. So it was a decision that we made at the time, but that was also before we were on the FI path. I think if we knew what we knew now, would we do it the same way? Probably not. I mean, we would probably make it a little bit more low key, but I mean, at the same time, it was a great time, and never forget that day, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the questions that's on our mind is that all four of our kids are in their 20s now. None of them are close to a wedding, but it's kind of the next step on their life that we would probably have to support in some way. So we're just kind of starting to have that conversation of what that's going to look like. I guess to maybe tie it back, I think you've read Die with Zero.
Yep.
One of the key takeaways there was to give to your heirs at the point in which they could truly use it, not wait until you're deceased and they inherit it, which in my case, hopefully I live a long life and my kids are only 20 something years younger than me. They don't need that money when they're in their 60s and 70s. So I think that now we're kind of trying to think through, let's say they don't even get married, but we want to be able to provide for them in some way. We're starting to think through what are the life milestones that might make sense. So is it 25 years old or 30 years old or 35 years old? And at what dollar amounts do we give and how do we present that? It's kind of a fun exercise to have because I know it can be life-changing to be able to go, okay, here is quote unquote your inheritance. To be able to get that at an age and a stage in your life whenever you're still trying to figure things out, maybe you're struggling a little bit, and hopefully they're not listening to this because they're going to be expecting something, but it could be something that could really put them on a more potentially successful path. And I want to be able to do that, but we're just obviously we want to be cautious with it as well and just not provide that at the wrong time when it could be just potentially wasted.
And that's kind of why, at least the way that Don and I have thought about it is just trying to lump all of those major expenses into kind of one single gift. I know it's hard to try and put that. It's like, okay, at what time do you give that? Right? I have a really good friend who was the recipient of a trust, right? And of course, people may see that as a silver spoon. You're completely ruining that child or, that young adult, whatever. They're not incentivized to work. And yeah, hey, maybe there are components of that, but maybe not. You never know how that changes the trajectory of somebody's life just in not knowing, I'll go off on a tangent in my point, but it is, when you meet somebody, you never really know what they're going through. And you never really understand the struggles of what's going on in their life. And so you never really know the true impact of a gift like that until it really happens. And we have been the recipient of an inheritance when we never expected to get some from a passing of a family member. That's never how you want to receive money. We never really expect or want to receive money. That's not like a desire that we have in our life. But
Your 5 plan.
Yeah, not part of my 5 plan. But certainly, like you said, when you have kids that don't have houses, or hey, maybe they're struggling to get their footing a little bit, or even like, hey, I could go get a loan at 9%, but hey, maybe this allows me to pull down the amount that I'm getting for a loan, and that drastically, or I get that loan at whatever rate, but hey, this allows me to knock off PMI immediately, and so I don't have to pay private mortgage insurance and stuff like that. So you never really know what people are going through and how that can impact their life. So yeah, with that Die with Zero, I mean, those were, I see kind of both in our notes is my biggest takeaways were really that the time bucketing of experiences and using money appropriately in your certain times of life. Because if I want to go climb mountains, I'm probably not going to go do it when I'm 80 years old. And giving to your heirs, the earlier the better. Move it to the left in your balance sheet or whatever, is moving it forward and giving when you're able. Because like you said, I mean, nobody wants to receive an inheritance when they're 60. I don't think that's not in anybody's plan. That certainly by anybody that's on the 5 plan, or hopefully is an heir of somebody on the 5 plan, is hopefully we've set ourselves up and our children up for that kind of level of success.
I've been aware of some situations where the inheritance came whenever the recipient was in their 60s, and it would have been, as an outsider looking in, it would have been nice if it would have skipped a generation. It's like, well, that person, and I don't know what the circumstances were behind the scenes. Maybe there was a passing down, but I knew that it was from the grandparents down to the parents, and the parents certainly didn't need it. And it would have been nice for it to go down another level, bypassing that. But then it gets into it's touchy. But yeah, I mean, that's one of my biggest takeaways from reading that book.
By 30, you certainly have a solid head on your shoulders, I think, is hopefully most of us are got our water legs underneath us.
Speak for yourself,
by 30.
Elliot. I did not fall into that camp of having my life figured out at 30. Maybe by 35, things were starting to make a little more sense to me.
Hey, come on. Mine's all hazy. I didn't really know what's going on at 30. I don't even know what's going on at 38. So maybe one day I'll get there.
All right.
Well, is there anything else that we want to talk about here before we put a wrap?
Nope, I think we've gone long enough.
Well, thanks for sticking with us, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Elliot.
See you, Josh.